Today I'm coming to you with a January 2026 reading recap. The month isn't fully done yet, but I have a book that needs to go back to the library. So, as a reminder, 3 of the reasons why I read is that it's either for spiritual growth, professional growth, or creative enjoyment. This first book is Daughter of Rome by Tessa Afshar. Pro tip, if you want to find a way to read, decide to do a crock pot meal. You can feel really productive by having a meal ready at supper time that you take over to a friend's house, but spend the day reading. And that's what I did on January 1st. Now, I think it's put me maybe into a little bit of a reading slump, but more on that later. This book was a 5-star. This is a fictional telling of the romance between Priscilla and Aquila, who are introduced to us in the book of Acts of the Bible. And so we know some key historical moments of Priscilla and Aquila. They are married and that they work alongside Paul, but we don't know much else. What this book does is it transports you to 50 AD into a culture that we know a lot about, but wouldn't know a lot about these people's personal lives, other than that they were part of the early church and spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so in this book, we have somebody who is a Gentile and someone who is a Jew who meet and get married, and that's Priscilla and Aquila. We see how the early church, how 2 cultures collide and a new one is beginning. It's absolutely brilliantly done. So Priscilla, or Prisca, is the daughter of a Roman general, and we hear about her life and a possible background to it. And then Aquila, who would have been a son of a Jewish man. What I love about this book is that it's primarily biblical fiction, and then secondarily, it's a romance. It shows individual character growth and a long list of side characters. Yes, Paul makes an appearance in this book because eventually Priscilla and Aquila, once they are married, they're in Corinth, and that's where they meet Paul, even though they've heard about them in the village where they're at. And then at the end of the book, just like in the Bible, we know that Priscilla, Aquila, and Paul are in ministry together as tent makers. This is just beautifully woven together, and there are several side characters that are really deep and rich and what it meant to be in Roman culture. Tessa Afshar's prose is amazing. As you can see, I've tabbed it all up, but I wanted to keep some of these quotes because they're just so beautiful. So I just have to show you. I've taken this covered book that my friend Jill gave me. Thank you, Jill, if you're watching this. And basically, I've started to capture quotes from books in the library so that I can keep. One of the ones that kind of stuck out to me is when a mentor is speaking to Aquila because he's a disinherited son of a Jewish man, and he's disinherited because he has started following Jesus. And so he was kicked out of his Jewish family. It said, but fortunately, God had the foresight to separate you from them. And that's on page 102. And for me, this is something that led to prayer because I've thought about people in my life that God has separated me from. And while painful, it actually has helped me grow closer to God, just like it did for Aquila. And so there's little moments like this when you read a Tessa Afshar book that you can't help but be grateful to connect with the character in a way you're not expecting. And you see how they grow and change and be more like Jesus as they grow in their faith walk, which is what we should all aspire to do as Christians. So yeah, I have a lot of quotes in here, like one that says, not every storm is of God's making, he said. Not every unfulfilled dream is his punishment. We live in a fallen world where our enemy runs wild. His talons gouge every heart he can reach, and that is many. God can use such things for good. That doesn't mean that he instigates them. And I just love the scriptural truth that Tessa Afshar brings through in her characters. As always, Tessa Afshar, in her author's note, encourages the reader to engage with the biblical text. And some of the scripture alongside this story are all of the book of Acts, 1 Corinthians 16:19, Romans 16:3-5, and 2 Timothy 4-19. So Tessa Afshar for me is someone who I will probably be reading to zero. And I have a couple of other books on hold by her, which hopefully will come through and I can read another one in the month of February. So we are past January, but I'm going to go ahead and give you my reviews on the other books that I finished reading in January, just because I committed to myself that I'd put out a monthly vlog on what I read, because I pick good books that need more spotlights. I'm not a typical reader. Anyways, so I'm going to go with some books that I started in December and finished off right in early January, and they're still sticking with me. And the first one of that is The Last of the Magi. This book is really cool because, as you know, in the story of Jesus' birth, there are 3 wise men that come because you've sung that hymn. But actually, that's not in the Bible. There are wise men that come and they give 3 gifts: frankincense, myrrh, and why am I pulling a blank? Gold. And basically, this book is a fictional retelling of somebody who is a descendant of the Magi, because we also know that the Magi, why they know about Jesus and the coming Messiah, because they're from the Far East, is because Daniel prophesied about the Messiah in around 500 AD. So this is like generational promises, prophecies that are coming true that a young adopted son into the family of a man has to fulfill. So it's such a fun adventure. If you have a teenage boy who likes reading, I think this is an excellent book that you should put in front of them. I know that my friend has a son who's a fairly advanced reader, and he's quite young, and I'm still going to give this to her because while it is a thicker book, he will devour it. As you can see, I also really enjoyed the prose. I did find it a little bit difficult to get into because when I started reading it in December, while it kind of has Christmas connotations, it's not Christmas because they're in the desert and Christmas hasn't really become a thing at all yet. So the storm outside and the desert setting was a little jarring for me to get into, and I think that's why it took me just a little while more to get into it. But once you drop in, you are in a very different climate and culture, not only because this is historically set, but also because it's in the desert, which, I mean, I live in Canada, so very different climate. And so you're in the world of him trying to do something that his father has tasked him to do, and it's an adventure, and he's with caravans, and there's a tiny little subplot of romance because this is a male author. Patrick Carr wrote this for his sons, which is why I also think it's a great book if you have a teenage reader. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because this is a really good book, complex characters. There's a massive time jump because obviously he's bringing one of the gifts as the Magi to the birth of Jesus. But then there's a massive time jump at the end, which just puts quite a nice bow because the character shows up during Passover week at the end of Jesus's ministry. And so you want to read this ending. It's so good. Anyways, if you've read it, let me know below. Now, the next book that I started, I believe even in November, was this really dense book. This is I would say it's probably a mid-level book. Like it's not Christine Kane or Lisa Bevere or Jenny Allen style writing. This is probably like people who like to read commentaries or more technical books. Like I could see this being used in a class about the early church, like alongside the epistles. The author of this book, Randolph, is a New Testament professor at a university. This book is about Paul in first century letter writing, secretaries, composition, and collection. And it's really cool. Like I have highlights throughout this book. It is tabbed. It is so interesting because if you look at art, you've probably seen pictures of the Apostle Paul sitting down and writing a letter, kind of looking like a scribe. I don't know if I'll be able to find a piece of art, but if I do, I'll like transpose it here. But this is what we perceive it to look like. And in reality, that is not first century life in Corinth or in prison. We know that there was prison letters. And so what this goes into is kind of what it would have looked like to send a letter at that time of the world history in that region, what it would have cost, how they would have written it. Even something as simple as it wasn't normal for them to have tables then. And so it's not like he even sat down at a table or a desk. He often would be sitting down and like using his own garments or cloak as a taut surface between his leg and writing, and what the writing implements would have looked like, how Paul probably would have been speaking or preaching or talking to some early Christian community. And it was through a struggle that they were having that he'd like talk it out with them. And obviously Paul was submitted to the Holy Spirit. And then it was through that the letter was written. And often a letter was carried by somebody, and what that would have meant, because now when we receive a letter, you could pick up the phone and be like, what did you mean when you said this? But the reality of it is back then, Paul probably would have sent the letters with Onesimus back to Colossae. Onesimus would have had some knowledge of maybe something that would have been a question that the church in Colossians would have asked. Anyways, it was a phenomenal book. It's not for the light of heart. This is not a binge read, but it is so worth it. If you've ever struggled reading the epistles, I know that in my small group, there was this one lady who kind of shared at one point in time when we were going through some of the epistles. She's like, sometimes I just feel like Paul is full of himself. And so this just gives you an insight into Paul's world. And I liked it so much that I picked up the other book called Rediscovering Paul that Randolph Richards is a co-author on. This book is footnoted out the wazoo. So if you disagree with a position or you've read something before that you think may be contradictory, it's very well cited. There are some people who critique this book and his perspective, but I'm not one of those. I love this book. You can read about it in my Goodreads review, and you'll probably hear a little bit more once I read that other book because it's definitely on my list for this year. All right. So my next book that I read was Bridge to Haven by Francine Rivers. I have joined a virtual book club, which is done by Read Co. And she is doing 12 Francine River books. And Francine Rivers in the Christian fiction scene is like a big deal. And I have never read one of her books. I mean, Janet Oak is the other one. And I read all of her books when I was a teenager. That was at that time. She's probably written stuff since then. But definitely not the same genre or style of writing because Francine Rivers in Bridge to Haven really deals with deep themes. Now, this book was a 3-star for me. But I think it's because of the difficult themes that it deals with. It has a beautiful romance in it, but it also deals with, so I'm just going to say trigger warnings, it deals with like adoption, unwanted pregnancy, drugs, SA, because I don't think you can say that on YouTube. So it's got like a lot of really deep themes. So enter with caution. And that's what makes it a little bit more of a challenging read. I had a hard time also relating to the time period because this kind of like, there's stuff that like you scooch in at, I think it's in the 1930s, but the book ends up being in the 1950s, which is interesting. And I do like books in the 1950s, but there was just something about the setting which is kind of unrelatable for me. So the beginning of the book, Abra, the main character, is a young girl, and you really like flash through her life really fast. So I'd say the first like 25% of the book maybe is about the struggle about how Abra is a part of her adoptive family. And then you flash forward to her being a teenager and making a really bad decision about a boy. That's not the romance story. And then a lot of stuff happens from there. So there is a reading vlog by Sheen Reads Co. about this. For me, this was a 3-star book. I think probably interesting for me is that at the end of December, or once I have read all 12 of the Francine River books, I will probably do a ranking of which ones I loved and just liked. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But this one was a 3-star for me. I got it from my local library, which is great. The themes in it and the writing are good, but there was just something about it. I don't know how to describe it. It was probably a 3.5, but Goodreads only lets you give like a 3-star. You can go read my review over there. The next book I want to talk about, a book off of my bookshelf. So this was an audiobook that I read by Karen Swallow Pryor. And from what I understand about this book, so the book is called You Have a Calling, Finding Your Vocation in the True, Good, and Beautiful. Now, I have this as an audiobook. This is a book that I own on my Audible. And being someone who works in human resources, I tend to have bought a lot of these books in my past. And as you know, I want to read off of my shelf books every month and not just, I will admit I have bought far too many books this year already. But yeah, books off my shelf is like my priority ring. And that was one of them. Now, my understanding is that she was invited to speak and have a lecture. So the first part of the book, or maybe the first chapter or something, is basically a retelling of that speech that she did for that place. And then she extrapolated. And as far as I'm concerned, I gave it a 3. It's very theoretical, very frameworky. I don't know how to say it. It's not practical, right? It's not tactical. It really addresses the fact that there is this notion in Christian life about the divide between secular and sacred. And often we as Christians don't look at our work as sacred and a divine appointment given to us by God. So in that, I 100% agree. But she kept on trying to prove that point the entire book. And it's kind of like, I don't think I needed 6 hours of that. So yeah, I already know that there's a divide. So for someone else that might be struggling through that. And so maybe it'll be helpful for someone to read that book to just say, hey, that's a common struggle that people have. But yeah, I've already come to that realization. So I didn't need a 6-hour book to tell me that. Good book. Lots of parallelism. Like, Careful used to be a literary professor. That's not what she does now. Now she's mostly a writer, I believe. And so it's very much in that professory tone, which I feel lectured at. It's not, I don't know, there's something a bit off about her writing, which is why I gave it a 3. Good book, well referenced. I just didn't need 6 hours to prove to me that Christians shouldn't make Sunday be the only sacred appointment in their week when they have been given a talent and given a job. And that is also very important, right? Like, there's not just one holy profession, and that is pastor. Anyways, I can rant on that for a little while, but I won't do that. I'm happy I got it up on my reading shelf. And then I have 2 more books that I got from the library. Again, one was an audiobook called The Broad Life of Frederick Fife. And this is an interesting literary fiction set in Australia. I don't know why, but I love books that are set in Australia. I don't know. I'm going to have to go there someday. It's written by Anna Johnston, and it is such a tender book, the way it's written, and it's an intergenerational book. There's a calamitous event that happens at the beginning where this octogenarian somehow has mistaken identity. I don't want to be spoilery about it, but he ends up being put into a home, even though he doesn't need to be in a home, and it's a mistaken identity thing. Anyways, and he works that out, and he brings a lot of really good things into that community. So like the nurses who are on staff, other patients, the family members of the other patients, and then also because he's replacing somebody else's life, that person's backstory he doesn't know but gets to know. And a very interesting thing happens there. And that book for me was a 4-star. I think I struggle when the author is so close to answering the question of what is the purpose of life and misses it by not understanding that ultimately we're created to have a relationship with God. So I don't know if it was great writing, it was good, but I don't know, that element just is missing. Like, I don't know. And I don't know, it definitely wasn't a 5-star read in terms of the prose, but it was a very interesting concept and very cool setting. So I really enjoyed it. The next book that I'm going to talk about that's a secular fiction is How to Walk Away by Katherine Center. And this book is about the main character has an accident early on in the book. She's in a plane crash with her fiance. And you hear about what it takes to overcome. Like, it's about human resilience in the face of obstacles. Like, her whole life gets completely upended because of this plane crash. Her fiance ends up walking away from her, and then enter a handsome Scottish physiotherapist. So, you hadn't yet hello kind of thing. I love that Katherine Center writes some of like the Scottish brogue type stuff. But like, this is, I would consider, a kind of a popcorn book, meaning that you'll read it, you'll enjoy it, but the story, does it stick with you? I don't know. It's kind of like watching a meaningful rom-com that answers more than just, does Jill get with Jack at the end of the book? Like, so this talks about human resilience and overcoming physical challenges and what it's like to have your life completely up and make the best of it. I don't want to say too much because that goes through, but I mean, it's a rom-com, so there's going to be happy ever after. And one of the cool things about this book is there is a bonus novella or short story at the end from the perspective of one of the emergency response people who shows up at the crash, which happens like in the first couple chapters, or even in the first chapter, I think it happens. But you don't know much about her because she doesn't continue in the story of the book. You get this little excerpt of her perspective of that plane crash at the end of the book. And from what I understand, and I think I have it on my list with Libby, there is actually a book that then gets written about this first responder, but I haven't read it yet. So How to Walk Away, 4-star. It's a solid Katherine Center book. Would recommend. Yeah, that's about it. Overall, January was a different style of a reading month because I only got 7 books done. But I started January 1st with an awesome book, which probably is good foreshadowing that I'm going to have an excellent reading year. But I only got 3 books off of my personal shelf of the 7 total that I read, which is significantly lower than what I normally read. So you might be wondering, hey, Lisa, what's up? And I'll tell you, I was convicted when I'm doing my January reading recap and as I entered into my church's 21 days of fasting and praying together. And we used that time, and I mean, I kind of knew what my word for 2026 was going to be going into the year, and that is studying a little bit more on the fruit of the Spirit. And so in that vein, on January 18th, I had this light bulb conviction moment where I'm pretty sure the Holy Spirit was saying, you are a little bit too passionate about these fictional books that you've been reading. I want you to be spending more time in my word. And so I bought a new Bible and I started a vlog series that I'll be putting up on this channel of reading through the Bible. It takes 80 hours to read the Bible. I did some Sybil math and went into my Dwell app to find out that if I was listening to it on audio, how much listening would that be? And it works out to be about 80 hours. So I figured, okay, let's do an 8-week self-challenge to read through the Bible. And it's not to speed read through the Bible. It's to read through the Bible with a singular focus of fruit of the Spirit, which is my word for the year, and to see where I could get. So this is a self-challenge. I bring you along with my revelations, what the Lord is saying to me through the word and how I'm studying it, how I'm fitting it into a very busy season of life. And so you'll see those vlogs come out shortly, and I'm going to not spoil it because I'm in the middle of still reading it. It's not completed yet. But I started that on January 18th. So obviously, that is why I have a little bit less book reviews to do because I'm reading books of the Bible. So, still get a lot of reading in. Anyways, let me know what you read in January or what you're reading lately or what you're reading now, and maybe even what book of the Bible you're reading in this season of your life. If you made it this far, put a snowflake in the emoji below. If you don't have anything you want to say, like, subscribe if you want to see what's going to happen with this vlogging series that I'm going to do week by week. Lots of editing in the works for that. In the meantime, be light, be salty, be blessed.